The shinobi crouched low on the pagoda roof and listened to the night air. Up here in the mountains, away from the hustle and bustle of the markets in town, it was almost silent, just the distant rattle of shutters somewhere behind him. The mountain shrine was tucked out of sight, so far into the countryside that no one would stumble onto it by accident. No one would come here without a reason. The shinobi knew the face of his target, a warlord turned politician with more blood on his hands than the assassin sent to kill him. By the burning glow of the night sky, the shinobi could see the man kneeling at the shrine. The path was made up of small stones, so he'd have to drop onto the grass and creep around the pond to approach his target. No guards, no one else was there at all. This was the spot where the man came to pray when he was struggling to sleep, perhaps trying to atone for the lives he'd taken. Perhaps he didn't care at all. The ninja drew the blade in total silence and timed his drop to the ground with a rattling noise in the distance. With each dainty step, he closed the distance to his target, readying the blade over his head. It was done in a moment. The man was dead before his body hit the ground. He likely didn't even notice as the steel had severed the nerves running down his spinal cord. So sharp was the blade that it slid through his bones like a fish through water. Raising the blade to his eyes, the shinobi cleaned it quickly. If he was seen with blood on his sword, he would immediately be implicated. Not that he was ever seen, but precautions like this were what kept him out of sight for all these years. When you lived in the Valley of Ashes, the burial grounds for countless wars, you had to become a shadow, become one of the ancient spirits haunting the woods. But as he wiped the red from the steel, he caught a flash of light in the reflection, an orange glow marking a jagged line across the metal. That's strange. Sunset was several hours ago. Come to think of it, why was there an orange glow in the sky? He snapped his neck around to see the fires through the gates into the pagoda's garden. Down by the ocean's edge at the foot of the mountains was the city where he had always lived, and it was on fire. Leaping up onto the walls, he stood up straight, surveying the horror scene taking place before him. Thick plumes of smoke billowed up into the night sky, so dense and large that it seemed to become the blackness of the night. It was hard to make out much of what was going on down there. The shinobi looked everywhere to try to see the invading army or the rioters, but there were none. Just people running in all directions, like ants out of a flooding nest. But there, moving in amongst the smoke, were other shapes, impossibly tall, lumbering around like people. People that towered over the houses, that had to crane down to the ground to scoop up the poor civilians who were running this way and that. The shinobi stood there terrified, as he realized that the rattling sound he'd been hearing all night wasn't from any shutters at all. He could do nothing but watch as the trees in front of him trembled and buckled in all directions as a hulking, shadowy figure lumbered towards him. The Imperial Japanese Anomalous Matters Examination Agency, or the IJAMEA, was a Japanese agency responsible for tracking a number of mysterious and often dangerous artifacts, creatures, and anomalies prior to the Second World War. In 1945, the IJAMEA was shut down and absorbed into the SCP Foundation. All of these data, historic records, and anomalies were all transferred over into the Foundation's control. Reasons for this were partially political and partially in the interest of world peace. The formation of the IJMEA was influenced heavily by Japan's ties with Germany in the first half of the 20th century. The Imperial German Anomalous Matters Examination Agency was the blueprint for their Japanese equivalent. However, with increasing militarism in Japan throughout the 20th century, the IJMEA became increasingly obsessed with trying to harness their anomalous discoveries in the interests of military power. Their goal became the establishment of a yokai battalion, powerful enough to establish them as one of, if not the world's greatest superpower. Following the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan surrendered in the Second World War and agreed to dissolve its military, including the IJAMEA. That left the Foundation with the task of picking up the threads left behind and trying to come up with new ways of securing, containing, and protecting some of Japan's most deadly SCPs. Few more deadly and evasive than the entities that were too much, even for the Yokai Battalion. SCP-2863. In 1946, cleanup operations were in full effect, trying to deal with the fallout from the atomic bomb dropped on Nagasaki. Crews dressed in lead-lined suits worked around the clock, burying radioactive material and trying to remove as much contaminated debris as possible. Rebuilding the city was still a long way off. At various points, the wind would kick up and carry the dust left behind into the air, creating a dangerous radioactive haze. Crews continued to work through such conditions as the understanding of airborne contamination was still in its infancy. Watanabe Goro was one such worker. Midway through a night shift and clasping a damp rag to his mouth, he pushed on through the dust, clearing out building after building. They had spent the morning carrying corpses out of an unidentifiable building. The corpses themselves were pretty much worn away too, just skeletons really, charred by the blast from months before. As Goro staggered along the street, he kept feeling like he was imagining things. The long hours and traumatic conditions were enough to make him see all kinds of things in his dreams, but he kept feeling like his dreams were starting to creep into the real world. Shadows kept moving through the haze all around him, taller than buildings, staggering around as if they were drunk. They had been appearing all night, just out of sight, but always close by. He stopped and leaned against what was left of a brick wall. There was one of his hallucinations now just up ahead of him. The husks of buildings on either side of him were about as tall as their knees. It must have been 30 meters tall at least. But its legs were strange. There seemed to be a gap in the middle of each of them. They were skinny. No, skeletal. The skeleton's foot crushed a car right in front of him. The crunch of metal was loud enough to snap Goro out of his stupor. This wasn't a hallucination. Hallucinations can't crush cars. With a yelp, he tumbled backwards, staring up into the haze of dust. He saw the shape of a pelvis. Above it, what must have been a ribcage the size of his house, but the creature disappeared into the darkness and the dust. If it was too tall for him to see its face, maybe it was too tall to see him on the ground as well. The skeleton stopped, standing directly over him. For a second, he thought that maybe he'd be okay, but then, with a great rattling rumble, the monster hunched down low, and the enormous skull appeared out of the haze, flying right towards him. He managed to dodge its gnashing teeth, but it caught his foot, sending him rolling through the radioactive dirt. Goro didn't give himself a moment to recover, though. He took off running as fast as he could, hearing the rattling sound terrifyingly close behind his back. You will be pleased to know that Watanabe Goro survived this incident. With only minor injuries, he managed to navigate his way to the nearest police station, where SCP agents, already familiar with the entity he had encountered, took control of the situation. The so-called starving skeletons had been roaming the bomb sites for several weeks by that point. It was the Foundation's first exposure to one of the oldest known entities that the IJAMEA had been studying for years. To date, 206 separate instances of SCP-2863 have been officially recorded. However, the myth of the Gasha Dokoru had been circulating in various parts of Japan since the 10th century at least. Giant skeletons were said to haunt the sites of particularly deadly battles, hunting by night, and feeding on the blood of their human victims. These myths tally up with what the Foundation currently knows about these entities. Instances of SCP-2863 only appear after sunset and will lose all corporeality when exposed to sunlight in the morning, or any light source over 1.1 lux. To give you some reference for that, moonlight typically falls between 0.25 and 1 lux. A typical room with the light on will be 100 or even 1,000 times brighter. As you can imagine, this has made them virtually impossible to contain, as they manifest and unmanifest outside of controllable conditions. They seem to have continuous existence in some way, however, as previously neutralized instances can and will reappear later on. In folklore, the Gasha Dokoru are spirits that take control of skeletons. Some hesitant researchers have posited that perhaps the instances that dematerialize are returning to their spirit form. Little is understood about what that means in practice. What's more, this SCP cannot be photographed. All attempts to capture them on film or digital cameras have failed, including video tests. It is theorized that there is a link between them not appearing on camera and their disappearance when exposed to light. Again, the link between them is still mostly unknown. Due to a steady increase in urban development in Japan and ongoing peace in the region, appearances of this SCP are growing increasingly rare. While this marks a positive change for the people of Japan, it makes it even more difficult to study this SCP and learn how to prevent it in the future. The most recent fatality to occur at the bony hands of SCP-2863 happened in 2008, and it was part of a Foundation experiment. While most of Hiroshima and Nagasaki had been redeveloped into bustling metropolitan areas, the outskirts of each city, particularly several parks, saw occasional instances of SCP-2863 appearing at night. As such, the SCP Foundation conducted a series of experiments under cover of nightfall, releasing D-Class personnel into a park in Hiroshima to observe how the SCPs hunted humans. Their enormous height, towering at over 30 meters, gave them a huge advantage, being able to chase people down with little difficulty. Another notable thing about them is just how quietly they move. There is a gentle rattling sound that follows them around, but aside from that, they are very light-footed and difficult to detect until they are right on top of you. This isn't helped by the fact that they hunt at night. As a result, they are remarkably quick at catching their prey. Once they have snatched their victims up in their skeletal fingers, they perform the same eating ritual every time. They eat the person and consume their blood. Initially confused by this finding, the Foundation was unsure where the blood was going, as the skeletons had no obvious digestive system. After the release of several more D-Class personnel into the park, they still weren't certain, but they believed that the SCP instances were absorbing the blood into their bones in some way. Further testing was requested, but denied due to the sheer number of D-Class fatalities in the area. They were starting to run out, and would have to ship more of them across to Japan, which was just a bit inconvenient for everyone involved. As the outskirts of those cities have been urbanized, the instances of SCP-2863 have reduced to the point that a smaller contingent of agents and researchers are now left in place. The light pollution from these areas is enough to prevent them from being able to manifest in the first place for the most part. Only on the rare occasion of power outages have Mobile Task Force 03 been deployed. Whilst researching this SCP, the Foundation came across an account from a shinobi in the 1700s. It was rare to find any kind of written document from a ninja for obvious reasons, but the account discovered painted a harrowing picture of just how much damage these yokai could inflict upon a city. The nameless shinobi first encountered SCP-2863 while assassinating an unnamed target in the mountains above his fishing town. Looking down on the fires below him, he saw human shapes walking through the smoke, dwarfing the buildings they moved between, before an instance charged through the trees straight at him. Diving out of the way, the shinobi quickly melted into the shadows. Both man and demon hunted one another throughout the night. He managed to climb onto its spine and inflict what he was certain would be a killing blow to the skeleton, only for his blade to bounce right off the bone. Caught and vulnerable for the first time in his life, the shinobi was helpless as the spirit threw him from its back into the courtyard and charged at him. It was only the hem of the ninja's sleeve catching fire from a candle that saved him. Just as the skeleton was about to bite down on his head, the light flared and the SCP disappeared entirely. For a long while, the man lay in the courtyard, pondering his actions. He should have died that night, yet he survived. Getting slowly to his feet, the man now knew what his destiny was. A monster that strikes from the shadows, scared of the light. He and the Gashodokoru were not so different. Understanding his target was the first step to defeating them. Snatching up a lantern from the ground, the shinobi descended the mountain into the wreckage of his hometown and defended his people. By night, he would emerge hunting down the Gashodokoru under the cover of darkness, banishing them with the light hidden under a dark sheet. The man fought night after night, narrowly risking death to save his people from the onslaught of the evil spirit. A small plaque was installed by the IJAMEA shortly before the Foundation took over the management of the SCP. It was installed at the foot of an old pagoda just outside a small fishing village. On it was a simple haiku: "Walking in shadow, in the midst of our demons, we will find the light." Now check out SCP-2662 Cthulhu and SCP-2935 O Death for more.